For over 50 years, the developed world looked to the Philippines to shore up a scarce resource.
Sumasakit ba ang chest pag binigay ito? Nasusuka
Nurses.
So finally, nakalagpas na kami sa immigration. Yay!
And for many Filipino nurses, working overseas is a lifeline, a chance at a better life.
In the US, it's at least 10 times of your salary in the Philippines.
But in April last year, the Philippine government imposed a deployment ban, grounding those dreams to a halt. Unable to leave the country, nurses could no longer take on overseas jobs.
Mas kailangan natin ng mga nurses dito sa ating bansa ngayon.
Yet a year after the ban, few have heeded the call to serve at home.
They would rather leave the profession because they're burnt out. Some of them have actually started exploring jobs in call centers. Kasi yun ang pinaka-limit natin 15 minutes sa loob.
Undercover Asia enters the COVID-19 frontlines to investigate if the government is doing enough to save those who are saving lives.
Siguro nasa 22 years old ako nun. 4 years ako sa Saudi, nagtrabaho as a nurse sa Abha City. Medyo mahirap first time ko malayo sa parents ko. First 2 months ko, sobrang na-homesick po ako. Parang ayoko pa umuwi dito ko, wala akong dadat ng trabaho dito na kasing ganda ng trabaho ko sa Saudi.
But Charmaine had to return to Manila after the clinic she worked for in Saudi Arabia closed.
Dahil sa pandemic, nag-close yung clinic na pinagtatrabahuhan ko. So, kailangan ko umuwi. Kailangan ko mag-exit kasi nga hindi na nila nirenew yung residence visa ko.
My countrymen, good evening. The crisis is very, very clear. COVID-19 is spreading all throughout the country. Try to obey what government is suggesting or ordering you to do.
March 2020. The Philippines records its first local transmission of COVID-19. To contain the virus, 12 million residents of the nation's capital are placed on lockdown. The country goes into a state of public health emergency.
Meron lang tayong mga itinalaga na mga referral hospitals for severe cases of COVID-19. Inutusan na ho natin ang ating mga gobyernong ospital. Itira muna yung mga private rooms natin sa bawat ospital natin na gobyerno to serve as isolation rooms. In preparation, if we will be exceeding our original capacity and we will go into surge capacity.
Barely a month later, the government bans Filipino nurses from going abroad. So when Charmaine returned from Saudi Arabia, she found herself stuck in the country.
Umuwi ako ng Pilipinas ng July. Ang daming offer sa akin. Yun nga lang, hindi pa rin ako makakaalis ng Pilipinas. Pero dahil nga sa deployment ban for nurses, parang nawala lahat.
Charmaine isn't alone. The ban leaves thousands of nurses like her in limbo. Coined from the word prisoners, they've come to call themselves Priso nurses. Robbed of their livelihoods and careers, the nurses demanded answers from the government. The outcry forced the country's Labour Secretary to hold numerous public Zoom meetings with healthcare and migrant worker unions to explain its position. The country is short of at least 23,000 healthcare workers.
We already have more than 150,000, and we cannot afford to be deploying our nurses abroad at the expense of losing the services of our nurses. And
overburdened and understaffed. The healthcare system is on the brink of collapse, warn medical workers in the Philippines.
The pandemic, yung consideration mo na may mga health workers na mako-quarantine, magpa-positive, kulang ka na agad kasi ang quarantine ay 14 days. So kailangan mong magdagdag talaga ng number of staff mo, kailangan triplehin.
The deployment ban dragged on for months.
Mas kailangan natin ang mga nurses dito sa ating bansa ngayon. We have to follow muna, medyo magtiis-tiis muna tayo. Baka pansamantala lang naman dito.
Sa amin maghintay kami. Hinintay naman po namin, we spent and we're about to lose our home, about to lose our livelihood.
Bakit hindi na kami pagbigyan?
Sobrang sakit po. Ano yun, ang dami nang nasakripisyo.
Ano ang plano mo? Meron ka bang savings habang hindi ka makatrabaho?
Why won't nurses take on jobs in the Philippines?
When we heard about the deployment ban, we were so shocked and angry about it that a group of us came together, researchers in Singapore and the Philippines, and decided that we needed to interview as many nurses as we could so we could document what they were going through. At ano naman yung balita sa agency mo? Sinabi ba nila kung kailan ka makakaalis at ano yung plano nila para sa'yo?
As a sociologist, Associate Professor Yasmin Ortiga has been studying nurses and migration for 10 years.
So ngayon na baka hindi ka nga matuloy sa UK, ano yung plano mo? In the meantime, babalik ka ba sa ospital?
Based on her interviews with Filipino nurses affected by the ban, she found it can take a nurse anywhere from 5 to 10 years before they can qualify for jobs overseas.
You have your nursing degree that you're invested in, and you had to pay a lot. It's one of the most expensive courses that you can ever major in the Philippines. And then they had to invest in doing the board exam. And then you actually need 2 years of work experience in order to qualify for overseas work. And this is where it becomes really expensive. And then they had to pay for, multiple exams, an English exam or a language exam if you want to go to Germany. And all those papers expire. So even if the ban is only temporary, if they expire, we're back to zero once again. So it's investments of time and money that kind of get wasted.
With so much already invested into her nursing career, today, Charmaine is back at a job agency. Having been stuck in the Philippines for months, her previous overseas job offers have all been rescinded. Now, she hopes to line up a new posting abroad in case the ban lifts.
Okay, so what have you been doing the past months?
Searching din po ng jobs. Some of the agencies, hindi po talaga sila tumatanggap ng application po for a while dahil nga po sa ban.
Agencies like this one are preparing for the day the deployment ban lifts. Global demand for Filipino nurses is on the rise.
Hindi lahat pala ng mga clients namin are government hospitals. So, ang mga Western countries po na sineserve namin are United States, United Kingdom, and Germany. Sa Germany naman, we have a client that pays 2,000 euros per month. Dumalabas, laging more than 100,000, mga 130 to 150,000 pesos per month yung sweldo dun sa UK. Together with the OTP, ang lalabas in the US, you can potentially earn around 200 to 400,000 pesos per month. No? So, wow, malaki siya. It's at least 10 times of your salary in the Philippines.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the Philippines. that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
With such a huge pay rise on offer overseas, it's estimated that among those who pass their nursing exams, nearly 2 in 5 will eventually end up working abroad.
So help me God. Congratulations!
Kaya ang kinakatakutan ng IATF na kung payagan natin umalis yung mga nurses natin, baka ang maiwan yung mga baguhan, yung walang experience siya. And yun ang kinakatakutan ng ating miyembro ng IATF.
We are number 22 in the world as far as number of COVID cases. Charity begins at home. Meron naman po tayong mga bakante, mga posisyon. Dito muna po tayo sana po magtrabaho.
Despite being stuck in the Philippines, qualified nurses like Charmaine are refusing to take up nursing vacancies in the country because they are not getting the pay they want and need.
So, mas mabigat yun sa akin. Kasi tatlo sila yung pinag-aaral ko. Basta aalis ako. Yun yung goal ko talaga. Nag-serve na po kami sa Pilipinas for 2 years. Hindi kami binigyan ng maayos na compensations, lalo na sa salary namin. Alam, sa haba ba ng panahon na nag-serve lang kami sa Pilipinas na parang kulang yung pasahod. Sobrang baba ng salary ng mga nurses dito sa Pilipinas.
If they are unable to ever leave the Philippines, they will not go back to the hospital. They would rather leave the profession because they're burnt out. Some of them have actually started exploring jobs in call centers instead of just preventing those who have done their time from leaving. The government should focus on trying to get the nurses who have left the profession to come back and entice them with a regular salary, with benefits, with proper protections and hazard pay.
Hello? Nananawagan po kami sa mga yung ating mga kanarsisan na magsilabas na po tayo.
Yes, dati po nalulungkot. Ngayon, nagagalit na po ang ating mga nurses.
Unti-unting pinapatay ng pamahalaan ito. Pinapatay po kami sa gutom. Pinagtrabaho nila ang mga health workers at inilagay sa panganib ang kanilang buhay. Tapos hindi mo sila pinapasahod ng maayos at wala pang benepisyo.
By law, public health nurses in the Philippines are actually entitled to a higher base pay than what they are currently earning.
Nurses, itaas! Itaas! Salary grade 15, ipaglaban! Ipatupad!
Salary grade 15 refers to a mid-level grade in a 33-grade table. At $680 US, it is the minimum starting salary for nurses, guaranteed by the Philippine Nursing Act. But for over 18 years, junior nurses enter public hospitals at salary grade 11, or $490 US a month, 4 grades lower and nearly 30% less money than what they are entitled to by law.
Maraming taon na kaming nagtitiis. Mapagtimpi ang mga nurses. Pero kapag tuloy-tuloy ninyo kaming ginagago, kagaya ng ginagawa nyo sa amin ngayon, hindi namin kayo titigilan.
For almost 2 decades, nurses have been fighting for their rightful wage since the law was passed. The problem is the lack of funds.
It is not uncommon in the Philippines that there are many unfunded laws. The Department of Health's budget was essentially flat since the late 1990s. If the budget is flat, then there is no other source of funding where you can get to pay the increases.
Pagod na ang mga Filipino nurses sa kanilang mababang sweldo at mababang benepisyo. Kaya ang sigaw po ng Filipino nurses, sahod ng nurses, itaas, itaas.
To live decently, a family of 5 in Manila would need at least $20 a day. However, as a staff nurse in a public hospital, Nurse Pauline only earns $13 a day, just $3 above the minimum wage in Manila.
May purpose kung bakit ako nanatili dito sa Philippines. Ilang beses na akong nakaranas na lumuhod sa akin yung nanay. We cater the poorest of the poor. Yun talaga. Minsan wala na silang pambili ng gamot, wala silang pamasahe. Mas pinili ko ng mag-serve muna. Ang nursing, hindi lang kami sumusunod sa order ng doktor, hindi lang kami naguhugas ng pagkatao, yung hawak namin. So, on our own pockets, bibigyan din namin. Kahit ito, baon ako sa utang.
Pauline is making barely enough to make ends meet.
Dito sa bahay na to, makikita na kami sa kapatid ko. Siya yung halos na sumusuporta sa amin. Siya din yung nagbabayad ng mga ng bills, lahat, upa. Kahit pa paano, ang laking tulong nun. Ang laki ng tulong niya sa pamilya ko.
Pauline's husband was also recently retrenched, forcing her to find other means to supplement the family's income. So she started an online business.
Babakasakali lang ako na mabenta to ng maayos dun. So kahit barya-barya lang ang kitain mo, kahit pa paano, makakatulong din sa ulam. Lalo pa ako may nagagatas pa. Yun na.
To encourage more health workers to serve in the front lines, the government signed an administrative order to augment their salaries. For every single day of work during the pandemic, the government will pay every health worker an extra 500 pesos, or $10. However, 8 months after the administrative order for hazard pay was signed, signs of trouble emerge.
Ano na ba ang status ng releases ng hazard pay? Ito ba ay na-disburse na?
There are still unpaid hazard pay. Total of 16,764 have not received their hazard pay.
Panloloko ang tawag dito. Manililil lang po nila ang ating mga nurses.
The Philippines is the world's largest source of foreign nurses. But it has the lowest number of nurses per capita in Southeast Asia. And in many geographically isolated parts of the country, nurses are in even shorter supply.
Good morning, sir, ma'am. Paparan tayo? Ha? Pakarwas, nagapan tayo? Medical tayo?
The Philippines has an average nurse to population ratio of 1 nurse to every 5,000 people. But here in Itogon, it's just 1 nurse for every 20,000 people. Nurse Darlene has been working in a small district hospital in Itogon for 10 years.
Ito naman ang aming pharmacy. Pero kasalukuyan, wala kaming pharmacist. Hawak pa rin ng nurse ang pharmacy. Pag walang pharmacist, nandito ang aming nurse station. Kasama namin ang aming attendant. Hindi siya nag-complain ng pain. Titignan ko muna kung anong gamot niya.
Today, Darlene is the only nurse on duty.
Sumasakit ba ang chest pag binigay ito? Nasusuka
There are 6 other staff nurses serving the hospital, but the number is just enough to cover all the shifts in a given week.
Kailangan kasi nilang magrelyebo. Ibig sabihin, yung isa magsi-7 to 3, yung isa magti-3-11, yung isa mag-11-7. Yun. Tas ganun everyday.
Nurse Darlene also doubles as an infection control nurse in Itogon's temporary treatment facility, where COVID-positive patients are quarantined.
na lang po, tsaka pa-face shield. Bago kami pumasok, dapat naka-face mask at naka-face shield na yung mga pasyente sa loob.
Konti ang staff. Kulang ang manpower na mga magse-serve para sa mga tao.
Okay, so inom ng maraming tubig at magpahinga. Si Lola is 94 years old. Mukhang for referral si Lola.
Kailangan mong i-exert yung effort mo dahil you need to be of service sa mga pasyente. Hindi ko siya pwedeng hindian kahit ilan sila or marami sila. Parang ganun. Kasi nandyan na talaga. Hindi ka pwedeng mag-back out or nurse ako, kailangan ko mag-serve.
According to a national study published in 2018, as many as 3 out of 4 local government units in the Philippines lack health workers. But there are districts in the Philippines that are capable of achieving a better nurse-to-population ratio. How do they do it? Pasig City, one of 16 districts in the capital Manila, has 1 nurse for every 1,800 people. That's 2.5 times higher than the national average.
So, with the onset of COVID, so importante yung hindi ma-overload ang ospital. So, ang ginawa namin sa command center, pagkatanggap niya ng tawag, ika-classify niya yung critical or non-urgent yung klase ng tawag na ito.
The newly revamped command center is part of Pasig's huge investment in healthcare. The city invested $51 million in its healthcare budget in 2020, a nearly 50% increase from the year before. This has allowed the city to hire more than 70 nurses working in the different departments of the command center. For example, nurses were employed to handle the incoming calls from the city's COVID-19 hotline to direct suspected cases to the right facilities.
Komplikado yung classifications. Base sa sintomas, makikita nyo na may mga medical terms. Mas madaling makuha ito ng nurses, mas naiintindihan ito ng mga nurses. So nurses ang tumatanggap ng mga tawag.
To ensure a patient is cared for even in transit, Pasig City has also employed nurses to ride in the ambulances that send patients to its hospitals. And finally, Pasig City also ensures that their quarantine facility has multiple nurses on shift.
May mga pasyenteng nandoon na may mga edad na, may mga health problems din, may mga mild cases din ng pneumonia na though hindi naman kailangan admitin sa ospital, pero so importante merong nurse at doctor.
The huge disparity in nurse-to-population ratios in various districts is the result of a 1991 law for decentralization. It transferred many responsibilities from the central government to more than 3,000 local governments. This includes healthcare. This means each local government could decide how much to pay nurses and how many nurses to hire.
When the healthcare system was devolved, the money that was given by national government to local governments does not have any specification that this goes to health, agriculture, or other sectors. Because the principle of devolution is the people on the ground know best where to spend the money that they have. This could explain why some local government units tend to spend more, say, on infrastructure, building more roads, or helping the farmers.
Unfortunately, not many districts choose to invest in healthcare. The pandemic revealed the varying healthcare needs of individual local government units and the need for a unified defense against the virus. And the national government tried to respond, setting aside $9.8 billion to fight the pandemic. Part of this, or about $277 million, was meant to augment the salaries of healthcare workers serving in the front lines across the country. It comes in the form of hazard pay, or about $10 per day per frontline worker. But that too has run into trouble.
Total of 16,764 have not received their hazard pay. And the reason for it is, there's no funding, no more funding.
Again, the decentralization of healthcare the Department of Health maintains is the culprit.
Hindi na namin control yung sa LGUs and how they will give the hazard pay to their nurses. Naging fragmented yung services kasi na-subject siya sa whims ng mga LGUs. Hindi naging priority ang health sa mga LGU.
Ano nakasulat?
Sulat ng relative para sa patient ko. Babasahin po namin sa kanya, para sa kanya.
While nurses continue to go over and above the line of duty, they have been left high and dry by the government.
Ma'am, may sulat po sa inyo yung relative nyo, Nay. Basahin po ha. Nakalagay dito, Mama, napakatapang mo. Alam ko kayang-kaya mo yan. Nandito lang po kami para sa'yo. I love you. Mwah. Yan po yung sulat sa inyo, ha?
Nakaka-demoralized. Imbis na i-spend sa welfare ng ating mga nurses at ibang health workers ay napupunta sa ibang bagay na hindi natin alam. No? Pero kung saan napunta, hindi naman nila ina-itemize. Dahil ito'y pera mula sa taxes ng taong bayan. So dapat ito ay accountability ng pamahalaan.
Nurses are not just being underpaid.
Nasabi po ng Department of Health na we have a sufficient PPE for... Hindi po totoo yun.
Nurses say they're being sent to the front lines unprotected.
Eight hours to 12 hours ang duty nila kada shift. So sila yung talagang nakababad sa ating mga pasyente. Ito nga yung frustration namin usapin ng protection. Tungkol ito sa nangyari nitong nakaraang taon. So, pwede ba ninyong ikwento? Kamusta kayo doon sa inyong pagtatrabaho? May panahon ba kayong nagpapahinga?
Nung nakaraan na 10 months po, dumaan din po ako dun sa parang butas ng karayom, ma'am. Naranasan ko din po na sobrang sunod-sunod po nung duty ko. Yun nga po, pinalulungkot ko na isa po ako sa mga health worker na nagpositibo po sa COVID. Siguro na rin. Kasi yung N95 ko po, 5 araw bago palitan. Hinahang lang po.
Wow.
When the pandemic began, the Philippine government assured frontliners that they will be given everything they require to save lives.
About 1 million medical protective items are being acquired right now, with the government and the private sector working together to purchase or produce the necessary quantities.
However, 4 months after that announcement, nurses continued to work under dangerous conditions because they lacked personal protective equipment, or PPEs. Undercover Asia gathered a group of nurses in public hospitals across Manila to find out just how bad the situation is.
Ito yung biggest burden sa ating lahat, the PPE. Isang PPE lang po sa isang shift. Para lang talaga ma-preserve yung PPE kaysa kumain ka, umihi. Tinitiis mo yun, 12 hours.
Amid a public outcry over the lack of PPEs for healthcare workers, the Department of Health held a Zoom meeting with representatives of healthcare workers to address the issue.
Ang protocol po niyan, nire-request po ng bawat hospital ilan po yung kailangan nilang PPEs. In fact, pati private hospitals ay nabibigyan through their request. Try to sit down with your infectious control together with your chief nurse or your chief of hospital to request with regards to PPE. Kasi kung pumunta po kayo doon sa Camp Aguinaldo, marami po tayong PPE doon na dinidistribute Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao.
But health workers continued to insist that this is far from the reality they are living in, day out. At one point, healthcare workers had to depend on public and private organizations to augment their supply of personal protective equipment, or PPEs.
We use the social media Facebook, we posted, and maraming dumating, and we are thankful. Kasi kung wala yun, wala na talaga tayong PPE lahat.
In some cases, due to the scarcity of PPEs, nurses had to buy their own. May 2020, Cainta Municipal Hospital. 3 nurses here had caught COVID-19. Fortunately, all 3 recovered. As 47-year-old Maria Teresa Cruz celebrates her colleague's recovery, she's seen wearing a brown PPE that she had to buy for herself, a sign of the dire shortage of PPEs at her hospital.
Palagi kami magkausap kung kamusta yung situation po dun sa hospital nila. And she shared her worries and grievances na hindi nga sapat yung PPE or kung may mga PPE man iniipit. Kinailangan niyang bumili ng sarili niyang PPE dahil hindi kasi sa kanya yung binibigay ng hospital.
July 17, 2020. Nurse Teresa is admitted to the hospital. Signs of trouble came earlier. 2 days prior, she had reported to her employer about having multiple telltale symptoms of COVID-19. Fever, cough, and the loss of taste and smell. But instead of the more reliable swab test, she was given 2 rapid tests. Both came back negative.
Ilang araw ka lang magpapahinga.
Sana negative yun.
Within 4 days of admission, she starts to have difficulty breathing. That same day, she was given a swab test, known to be more reliable than the rapid tests.
Nahirap ako. Hindi ako makatulog. Iniisip ko, hindi ako ang puti ng araw. Tulungan niyo ako. Pagdasal niyo ako. Habang kayo sa akin. Kailangan ko nakakasan ako.
Within 5 days, Maria Teresa Cruz was dead. 3 days after her death, her swab test results confirmed she had COVID-19. Her daughter, Joy Cruz, wants answers. With the help of her legal counsel, she has filed a case against her mother's employer for negligence.
Pero actually, nung ni-rapid test po siya, she had all the telltale signs of COVID-19 already, no? So, yun din yung hindi po natin maintindihan. Meron na mga simptomas, bakit rapid test pa rin yung pinilit na na ibigay?
Rin ang question ko, alam naman natin at sabi rin ng DOH na hindi confirmatory test ang rapid testing.
Joy's case is partly based on a Department of Health memorandum that rapid tests should not be used to definitively rule out COVID-19. The memorandum also states that rapid tests must be used in conjunction with RT-PCR, or swab tests. Joy contends that her mother may not have died if she was diagnosed earlier and treated on time.
Bakit walang testing? Bakit walang PPEs? And then, ang ginawa kasi namin ditong respondent is yung chief hospital. Kasi hinahanapan namin kung ano yung mga protocols niya, kung bakit hindi nasunod.
We want to seek accountability. Pero nakakamatay ang kapabayaan.
As of March this year, 82 health workers in the Philippines have lost their lives in the line of duty. Healthcare workers also make up 13% of the country's total COVID cases. That's far higher than the average of 2 to 3% found in many neighboring countries. Joy's final shock came when she received a message from the hospital's finance department. The message stated that on top of her mother's base pay, she would be paid 60.93 pesos a day for hazard pay. That's $1.26 US cents. A far cry from the $10 US a day that Maria and many of her fellow nurses thought the government had promised.
Nakita ko yung sobrang nanglumo ako nung nakita ko yung amount na ito lang pala yung katumbas nung buhay nung nanay ko.
Nurse Pauline counts herself lucky because of one simple fact. She survived. She spent more than 6 months serving in the COVID triage areas.
So yung risk sobrang laki. So tiniis ko yun. Hindi ko iniwan yung mga anak ko. May sakit yung anak mo pero hindi ka makauwi. Kasi nga baka yun yung takot ko na expose kami sa COVID.
Although she has since been assigned out of the COVID triage areas, the experience has left her shaken.
Yun yung masakit doon na ba't ko pa to ginagawa? Yun ang masakit din nun. Makikita mo yung payroll mo, ganun lang yung matatanggap. So kawawa naman yung mga anak ko, kawawa ang pamilya ko.
Wala kayong malasakit!
Tinawag niyo pa kaming bayani, pero kinakawawa niyo naman kami.
Araw na ito, nandirito ang mga health workers galing sa iba't ibang ospital, pampubliko at nananawagan para itaas ang sahod ng ating mga health workers. Matagal na nagdudusa ang ating mga health workers kakarampot na sahod.
Experienced or mid-level nurses in the Philippines are currently paid the lowest in Southeast Asia.
Tinawag niyo pa kaming bayani, pero kinakawawa niyo naman kami. Hanggang ngayon, makamama.
In 2019, the Philippine Supreme Court ruled that the Nursing Act of 2002 must be carried out, and nurses should not be paid lower than salary grade 15, or $680 US, a rise of 4 grades from their current starting grade.
Magising na ang mga tao sa DOH. Kailangan namin ng pera. Nagtatrabaho kami. Pinagtatrabahohan namin yan. Pagod. Pangis namin yan. Kaya dapat i-release mo na yan. Ngayon na. Now na.
But the execution of the court ruling created even more furore. Instead of raising nurses' pay across all ranks, only the minimum wage of nurses below salary grade 15 was raised.
Kayo mga nurses, nandyan sa loob, makinig kayong mabuti. Ang budget po na ipinaglaban natin na mga napadalunan na natin sa Supreme Court, na ngayon po nakapinpin pa din. Kayong mga nurses na nandyan sa loob, hindi po safe, hindi pa po tayo panatag.
More senior nurses who had expected a similar pay rise instead found themselves demoted, so that their wage remains unchanged.
Sa halip na magkaroon ng kaukulang pagtaas ang kanilang posisyon, nagkaroon ng downgrading such that yung dating nurse 2 at ngayon nurse 1 na lang sila. Ni-require ngayon ng Department of Health, kailangan munang pumirma sila sa isang dokumento na pumapayag sila na sila ay may downgrade. Bigyan natin sila ng tamang dignidad bilang mga manggagawang pangkalusugan.
We need to legislate. Kung tayo po ay tutulungan ng Kongreso, ito po ay masasaayos natin. Kaya nga po ang DOH ay humihingi ng tulong dito sa Kongreso upang po madagdagan ang kanilang budget para po maibigay ang mga pangangailangan ng bawat attached agency ng DOH po.
Hanggat maaari, gusto namin ibigay yung para sa kanila. Gusto namin ibigay yung tamang sweldo, pero hindi naman na ibibigay yung budget para doon.
In the midst of a pandemic, when many countries are increasing their budgets for healthcare, the Department of Health suffers an $836 million cut in its 2021 budget. This includes money specifically proposed for the deployment of nurses throughout the country.
So we have to cut the number of deployed nurses ng 12%. That would be about, ang nabawas sa slots ng nurses ay 2,319 slots.
It sends a message that you're not really important or you're not valued. For a lot of nurses, they felt that they were really looked down upon, also, by both hospitals and the government.
Nine months after returning from Saudi Arabia, Charmaine remains unemployed until this morning.
Ano pa yung mga benefits na makukuha?
Meron ding sick leave payment and meron ding accommodation.
Okay. Okay.
Automatic na yung insurance.
So covered yun lahat?
Covered lahat.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Charmaine's job was made possible after the government caved in to pressure from nursing unions to lift the 8-month-long deployment ban.
The ban on the deployment of Filipino health workers is now lifted. Sana yung iba naman will have the spirit and the fervor to serve the Filipino people, because we also need help and we have a crisis also to deal with.
The lifting sparked an immediate exodus of hundreds of nurses like Charmaine.
So finally, nakalagpas na kami sa immigration. Yay! Ang lamig! Sobrang lamig!
Though, sa totoo lang, may mga kaibigan ako na ang daming beses akong tinulungan para makaalis. Siyempre, lahat ng mga batch ko na Amerika na ang dami na nilang napundar. Sana pala ganito. Sinunod ko sila.
For 14 years, Pauline had chosen to stay in the Philippines to serve her fellow countrymen whom she felt needed nurses like her. Now, she's choosing to put her family first.
Para isipan ko naman ngayon yung pansarili ko sa yung kapakanan mismo ng mga anak. Nandun na ako sa punto, sabi ko nga baka hindi ko mapag-aral ng maayos sa sweldo kong natatanggap ngayon. Actually, ay naayos ko na yung papel ko para makaalis din. Ang target ko is UK sa Northern Ireland.
Pamahalaan, walang bondo.
This is a time when we realize that these group of professions who we've undervalued, we actually really, really need them. And so now their demands that they have been making for years suddenly have more salience.
Dagdagan ang budget sa kalusugan, iyan ang sapat na sweldo at kompensasyon.
But the question is, will they actually institute long-term change, especially after the pandemic is over?